This is a story about something very bad that happened. There was a very powerful and very respected religious leader. He didn't start out that way. This is the story of how it happened. He used to be just a member at the church, but he had quite a following. A lot of people respected him because of his biblical knowledge. He had a lot of disagreements with the pastor that was there. And long story short, he left the church and started his own. He had a property in the woods, and it started out as like small classes where he would start out as small Bible classes. Started out with probably like 10, maybe 15 people, but over time it just like kept growing. It kept growing and growing as time went on. And it seemed like with every class that he had, more people were listening to him. I don't know, the best way I could think of to describe it was, they just loved to take his advice and listen to him. And as time went on, it kept growing. More people started coming. Little bit of time went on, and it started getting more serious. And I was starting to think, what did I get myself into? But then it was too late to leave. He had it turned into a cult of people that respected him, and they were like eating out of his hands after a while, it seemed like. And they started worshiping him, and they started actually believing his delusions. They started believing he was actually a prophet. Cometh with me into the night, all hail by light, let by, dead bury by dead, for cometh with me, he told me and said. And they would do whatever he said, let by dead, bury by dead, for cometh with me into the night, all hail by light. And he called himself the light, and they actually believed he was the light. Little did I know at the time this would lead to one of the most historical mass murders, one of the most historical mass shootings in history. And over time, they started turning on each other, the cult members did. Like, I didn't think much of it. Like, one day, I just raised my hand to ask him a question during Bible study. He just answered it, know it all, the Bible. And after class, one of the members came up to me. One of the club members came up to me, and he said, don't question David like that. Crap, I said his name. That was his name, David. Like he said, that meant beloved by God. Don't question David, she said. It was one of the club members. He didn't like that. Don't ask him questions during class. And there was like a mass hysteria. They would all like start telling on each other and going to David and telling him what they said. Like if somebody said something that was out of line, they'd go and tell David. And David had what they called sessions, where he'd lock people in this room that got out of line for hours upon hours, and have all the other club members drill into their head how they're just such an awful person. How could you not listen to David? Come into the night, all hail by light, let by, dead bury by dead, for cometh with me, all hail the light, cometh to the night. And yes, they would all start chanting during his classes. And like I said, it seemed like I was the only one that wasn't part of this mass delusion. It's like they were all under his delusion, and I was the only one that was sane. And I was afraid to leave. I was afraid to leave or question or try to get out of the situation because I didn't want another session. Last time he locked me in the room for 8 hours and drilled into my head, don't question David. They all just kept drilling into my head over and over again, repetition. And they kept, that's the key of the session, repetition, mind control. And within like 8 months' time, they were worshiping him like he was a god. They believed that God spoke through him, that he was a prophet. It turned into like a mass delusion. I was the only one that was sane, and I couldn't get out, man. I was afraid to leave because I was afraid, I didn't know what would happen if I tried to leave. They were all just like eating out of the palm of his hand, man. And he started having tests to test each other's, to test the members' loyalty. Like he'd have them do, it was called daily sacrifice. He'd pick a team member to kill what he called an outlander. People that pretty much people that didn't fit into the group, that were questioning his delusion. And he would have people killed. And he would put their heads on probably like 10 different members got killed of the cult. From the team members, the cult members gaining up on them and killing them. And they did like weird rituals. They did like weird rituals, like they put the head on a stick. They believed he was speaking through God, but I believe he was speaking through something else, man. And as time went on, he did like 10 sacrifices of cult members. And he had like people like kill like the neighborhood cats and bring them back and sacrifice them and like do rituals. And it was like with every ritual, they fell further underneath his delusion. It was like satanic, man, how he was like doing, it was like a satanic mind control. Every single ritual, they fell further and further underneath his delusion and listened to him more. Every time he was preaching, it started not becoming anything of the Bible. It started becoming like a cult, man. They started worshiping him like he was God. And he would chant, "Cometh with me." He would chant, "Cometh with thee into the night. All hail thy light. Let thy dead bury thy dead. Nothing means nothing to you anymore but me." That's the way it was believed. Everything in their life meant nothing but David's teachings. And it was like every single ritual gained more control over their mind. And one day he laid a plan out in front of us. He wanted to go to the church that shunned him, and he wanted to sacrifice the pastor and all the members of the church. He wanted to basically kill all the members of the church and sacrifice the pastor and take it over and create a church for Christ to come back to. And they were so delusional, man, they were actually chanting. And he was like, "Cometh with me into the night, let thy dead bury thy dead, for cometh with me," the Antichrist said. I believe the guy was the Antichrist. He was a false prophet, how he had everybody just feeding into his lies. And I was the only one that was sane, and I was afraid to leave. He told us that and he had everybody believing in him. Everybody around me was like believing in him, and I was trapped. I couldn't run away because I was afraid one of the team members might kill me at this point. Came in like a manifestation over a year's time, man. He had like a cult of at least 100 followers that were basically worshiping him and believing in his preachings. And he basically handed out guns to everybody after he laid out his plan to take over the church. "I am serious, my lambs." That's what he would call us all. His lambs, his followers. "Cometh with me into the night. All hail thy light." He called himself the light. Everybody would always say, "All hail thy light. Cometh with me into the night. As I walk down the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil cometh with me into the night. Let thy dead bury thy dead, for cometh with me. Let thy dead bury thy dead. Basically meant everything else around you, your family, your loved ones, doesn't matter. You're a part of this group now. And it was like a mass hysteria. He started handing out guns, laying out his plans to take over the church. The night came, and he said, Dawn, we're going to make them pay for their sins. And we're going to create a new heaven on earth for Jesus to come to. And they're also delusional. We will create a new heaven on earth. We will sacrifice the pastor to create a new heaven on earth. Down with the non-believers. Down with their false teachings. All hail thy light. The whole crowd started saying, all hail thy light cometh with thee into the night. All hail thy light. Let thy dead bury thy dead, for cometh with me into the light. All hail thy night. Was he the night or the light? And the morning came, and we all started marching towards the church. I was thinking, how am I going to get out of this, man? I was pretty much stuck in this cult. I was the only sane one in the middle of delusional. Everybody was like a part of this delusion. I was the only one that was sane. And I was following them towards the church. And David kicked down the door. The light kicked down the door. And before, it just all happened so fast. They started shooting everybody. And David walked up to this pregnant lady. And he started beating the crap out of her. They all started like beating her. And David was like, shut the fuck up, bitch, and stop moving around. Down with the non-believer. They started beating the crap out of her. And they cut the baby out of her womb. And they killed it in front of her. And David looked at the pastor and said, don't you fucking go nowhere. I got unfinished business with you. And everybody else in the church, they pretty much shot them. They killed the pregnant. That was the pastor's wife. They pretty much killed the pastor's wife and the unborn child. And then they went after the pastor. We must sacrifice him to the light. Create a new home for Christ. Sacrifice him to the light. Create a new home for Christ. And they tied him to the cross. Burn to ashes. Burn it to ashes. And they tied him to the cross. And they hoisted him up. And I was done. I pointed the gun at David, and I'm like, David, you can't do this. What are you doing? I should have done this a long time ago, but I was too far in. And all of a sudden, something hits me in the back of the head. You dare defy me? One of the cult members hit me in the back of the head with their gun, and I fell to the ground, and I dropped my gun. David looks at me and goes, you dare defy me? And he ties me to the cross right next to him. They're about to. They told, David said, tie him to the cross too. And they all started chanting, all hail thy light, cometh with me into the night. All hail thy light. And they're about to tie me to the cross too. And then I heard sirens going on outside. And the cops come in. And there was a huge shootout. And I hid underneath the bench. And it went on for an hour, man. Gunshots everywhere. And David, man, he lit the fire and lit the church on fire, and the pastor was like burning at the cross, screaming at the top of his lungs. And it was like bullets flying everywhere, man. The cops and the military, the SWAT team came in. Like I said, David had I don't really know how many cult members there were exactly. Somewhere in the range of at least 80 to 100. And there was a huge shootout. And eventually, I was hiding underneath the bench. Eventually, the military gained control. And they had to gun them all down, all the cult members. They had to gun them all down, the cult members. And David was actually the only one left standing, running out of the freaking church. The church was up in flames, and he was running away from the scene, and the military was chasing him. The cops pretty much put me in cuffs, and I heard a loud gunshot. David shot himself, man. He shot himself in the woods and ran away. All the cult members were dead. All the members of the church were dead. Several members of the police force, military, and SWAT team were dead. Over 130 deaths were caused that day. The cult of the false prophet.